Hey everyone, welcome back to another digital woodcarver tutorial. In this video, we're going to be working with our CAD/CAM software and creating a design to run on our CNC machine. Now, basically, we are creating a simple V-Carve sign. This sign will include an image, some text, and it's going to be applicable to the V-Carve desktop software, V-Carve Pro, or the Spire, because we're going to be using the tools that are available in all three of these softwares. Now, with our sign, we're going to basically create some text. We're going to weld objects. Some of the text and some of the things that we are working with, and they need to be cleaned up and they need to be brought together. We need to get rid of some overjoining lines and things. So we're going to talk about welding. We're going to talk about moving objects around, your text and different objects around the workspace. I'm going to show you a couple of ways that you can simply lay out your work area. We're going to be importing a bitmap image, which is basically your JPEG, PNG, bitmap, GIF, TIFF, and SVG. We're also going to be tracing those bitmap images, and we're going to be turning them into vectors. Now, once we have everything traced, we have our sign laid out, we can go ahead and create the toolpath, and in this case we're going to create a simple V-Carve toolpath. We're going to talk about that. And once the toolpath is created, we're going to save the toolpath and save the design, because it's two separate steps. Saving your toolpaths and saving your designs is two separate steps, so we're going to go over that. Okay, with that, we're going to go ahead and jump right into, I'm going to be using the V-Carve Pro for this demonstration, but as I said, it's applicable to V-Carve Desktop, Pro, or Aspire. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so the first thing we want to do is lay out our workspace. Basically, we need to tell the software the size of our material. So in my case, I'm working with a 13-inch wide by 16-inch tall board. My material is going to be 3/4 of an inch thick, and we are referencing the Z0 off the top of the block. Basically, we're going to be touching off to the top of the block. For the XY datum position, our starting position, our XY0, basically our home position, we're going to be working off the center of our board. Going to be working in inches, and we're going to go ahead and click OK and get our workspace set up. Now, I have a sample image. Basically, this is a sample image that a friend of mine sent over and asked if I could make a sign, V-Carve sign for him based on the sample image. And I wanted to share this tutorial with you because there's a lot of things in laying out this sign that could come in useful to you when you're working with text and different objects and things. So let's go ahead and bring in that sample image so you can see what it is. And basically, it's an image that he has sent over to me and asked if I could create. And if you notice, there's a lot of different fonts that we're going to be working with. The layout and the size of the text is going to be varying, from different fonts and different sizes and shapes and everything. And then we also have a ribbon over here this purple ribbon basically for the cystic fibrosis cancer. We're going to be bringing in that bitmap image so we can go ahead and trace it. So now that we have our sample image and basically kind of what we're working off of, we're going to go ahead and open up our text box, and we're going to basically begin writing our text and laying it out. Now keep in mind, there's a lot of different fonts in this particular image, but the software will recognize all of the fonts that are installed on your computer. You can also go to places online like dafont.com, dafont.com, and you can download different types of free fonts to install on your computer to use in your carvings. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start with our top line in this house in that particular image, and we're going to, for me, I need to get up to the A's, and I'm using the Amazon BT font. So we'll go ahead and just start typing this out, and we'll make sure we follow that. Now, once I have what I want typed out, I want to go ahead and set my text height The height of the text is going to determine how long the sentence or the word is, the phrase, so you want to make sure you size it appropriately. So in this case, I'm going to basically start off in the center here. I'm going to go ahead and click apply and see where we're at. And I need to go a little bit bigger. So I'm going to go 1.75. We'll click apply there. And 1. Alright. So once I have that, now here we come to moving text around and everything. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of the text tool for the moment. Now, of course, I can double click on the text or object, and it will create, it will open up these move, rotate, scale boxes. So basically, when these boxes are around your text, your center area from your center block and anywhere within the center area, this will allow you to move the text around the screen by working in the center. Your outside white blocks, these are for scaling your text. Or of course, we can absolutely go back into our text block when we have that text selected, and we can adjust the size appropriately. Okay. Now, the other way to simply move things around is we can use our alignment tool. If we are aligning to a specific area or object, we can come into our alignment tool, and let's say that I want to align this to the center of my material. We can use our alignment tools if we have another object up here. So let's say that I have a rectangle here that I want to basically align to. I can take my text and select it first. I can hold down my shift key and grab my rectangle, and in my alignment tool I can align to selection, with the last thing I selected being the selection. So I selected the text first, that means that's what I want to align, and I selected the rectangle last, and that's what I want to align to. And now I can use any of these buttons here in the lower part, align to selection, to align. So if I want to align that to the center of that rectangle, I can go ahead and click that center button. If I want to be in the inside edge, lower edge, so on and so forth. So we can absolutely use the alignment tools to move things around. And one of the other ways that we can move text around on our workspace is, of course, under the Transform Objects menu. Our first icon here is Move Selected Objects. Now, the Move Selected Objects window, we've got a couple of options. First of all, the anchor point that we want to set the positioning for. So if we look at the Move, Scale, Rotate box that's around our selected text, these white boxes here for the scale, we can choose whether or not we are anchoring, you know, that bottom left-hand corner here, or this bottom right-hand corner, so on and so forth, all the way around, or off the center block. We can set our positioning. So with that, I could come in here and put in my XY coordinates and make them absolute, meaning I want to move to these absolute positions, and it will move me to the center of my 0, 0 here. Now, one of the things that absolute is typing in the absolute coordinates. Let's say that on my Y position I want to be at the 1 inch mark. I can click apply and of course move that center point up to that 1 inch mark. Now, the relative positioning is relative, meaning moving from where it's at. So if I want to move 1.5 inches from its current position, I'm not typing in a coordinate, you know, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm basically saying relative to its position, I want to move 1.5 inches on, I actually want to do it on the Y, so let's go here, 1.5 inches, because I want it to move up 1.5 inches from its position that it was at. If I want to move it over on the X, let's say I want to move it over 1/2 inch from its current position, I can move it over that 1/2 inch. So relative is relative to its position, and absolute is an absolute coordinate. Okay, so I can come back to, you know, let's say 0, 0 here, click apply, and go back to that 0, 0 position. So that's absolute. Now, if I want my anchor point, that's the center. Now, let's say I change my anchor point here. It's going to show me the coordinates for where that anchor point is. And I can come in here and say, you know, if I do 0, 0 here, then that's going to move that anchor to that position, that bottom left corner of my design to that position. So just keep that in mind. Your anchor position is what we want to anchor on these boxes here. Okay. Now, the last way I want to talk to you about moving things around is simply using our arrow keys that are on our keyboard. We can use our arrow keys to move things around, up and down. And so basically I'm going to kind of use my arrow keys to get up to the position that I want. And then I'm going to come into my alignment tool and make sure that I'm aligned between the two side walls, that I'm basically centered in that area once I have it in there. Now we're going to go back into our text box and notice that my text is still selected, so it pops up in here in the box. We want to deselect by clicking anywhere in the white or gray space, and we want to go ahead and I'm going to find my next font, which is a Times New Roman, and I'm going to go ahead and type in my next section. And this needs to be a little bit smaller. And of course, I can resize it appropriately once I have everything laid out. Now with this, if we look over here on the right hand side of our image, it kind of falls under the eye and it's right over here. So what we want to do is basically kind of get it in that area. Now there's too much space between the we do. There's this line spacing is too big. So I can come into the edit text spacing and curve, and I can click that, and with that, once I'm in between the lines, we'll see those line indicators pop up. If I'm between text, you'll see the letter V and A, which means that I can move or control the text spacing, the spacing between the letters. But when I'm between the lines, you'll see that it changes to line. Now the two arrows in between the two lines basically indicate the direction that we're going to move. We can simply hold the shift key and notice that those arrows change direction, so we can basically increase the spacing if we need to. But what I need to do is I need to decrease the spacing a bit. Alright, now once I have that, then I can go ahead and jump back into my text box again. I'm still going to be using the Times New Roman, and we can start typing the next font here. I'm going to go ahead and click apply. Now this is going to be, notice how in the image it's basically kind of narrow but tall. So in this case I can go ahead and decrease the size by using my scale, and on the top here I can increase the height, and then I can simply use my arrow keys to get it into position. And we can go ahead and bring that in a little bit. Something to that effect. Now I do want to work on my layout to make sure I get my font size and everything right, but I'm just showing you kind of the basics so we can get things around. Now you understand from this basically creating your text, using your font, setting your text height, and getting things moved around with either the alignment tool, your arrow keys on your keyboard, or your move, scale, rotate selection, which is basically those boxes. We can move, scale, rotate, and I didn't talk about rotate. The little blue boxes on the outside here are your rotate. Okay, so I've got the sign laid out already. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to shut off my layer 1, and I'm going to open up my finished layout. And I want to go ahead and click on that and make that active. So I'm going to go ahead for the time being and basically hide this photo, this object here. We're going to move it to another layer and call it ribbon. So that way I can turn that off. We're not ready to talk about that just yet. But now that I have my text laid out and everything, we need to do some cleanup. And this is where we talk about the welding. We can weld. We have some tools under the Edit Objects menu to weld selected vectors together. Of course, we can use our scissor trim tool, our interactive vector trim. But what I need to do is on this particular text, this Amazon BT text, notice how the text will, it kind of overlaps into the next letter, and there's this line here. Well, we need to eliminate those, and now we could simply take our scissor tool. We could come over here and trim those objects away, but this is text. It's not an object. So what we need to do is we need to convert it from text to an object. And how we do that is under our text tools, under the Create Vectors menu, the curve, convert object to curve. And once we do this, we want to make sure that we have our spelling correct and everything like that, because once we do this, it will no longer be text. It will no longer be an object. It will be a curve. So once we do that, now all of these vectors are individual, and these are individual curves. So with that, we can go ahead and come in here, and as I said, with our scissor tool, we can come in if we need to, and we can trim those areas away to kind of weld them together and get rid of those overlaps. But we can also use our weld tool. And with our weld tool, if we select this area here, let me grab this text here. We don't need to have the eyes little dot selected, and we don't need to have the inside of the H selected, because if we weld these and we have this area here selected, the inside of this H hook, we will end up eliminating that or erasing that. So we want to deselect it, because all we want to weld are these areas that are overlapped. And with them selected, we can simply come over here and click the weld tool, and that will weld them all together. Okay, so either your interactive trim, your scissor tool, or your weld tool will work just fine in this case. Now, in this particular letter here on the S, we do have a loop that we need to eliminate. So if we come over here to our interactive trim, we can come over here and we can, well, let's first select this. Well, it's actually two separate vectors, so we can actually just hit our delete button and get rid of that. There we go. And so we need to do the same thing for our house. And so we'll go ahead and select that. We can deselect the, hold down our shift key and deselect the loop of the E, the center of the O, and the hook of the H. We can come over to our weld tool and click weld to weld those objects together. So we need to kind of clean things up. So now that top line is done, I think I do have another hook down here. And if I use my trim tool, I can basically eliminate that. Okay. So with that, we can go ahead to our next line of text, which is the same font as in this house. And we want to basically do the same thing. We need to clear up these overlapped areas. And again, we want to convert the text to a curve. So make sure you have your spelling and sizing and positioning and everything correct. So we'll go ahead and do that. And we can go through and use our weld tool, or we can use our interactive trim tool. I'm going to simply use the weld tool because I want to basically go through and select this whole line. And I'm going to go through and deselect the areas that I do not want to weld, which would be the center of the D, O, E, A here, the A here, the D, and E. And if I move over a little bit, we've got this, this. We don't need that. We don't need the I. Okay. So now with everything basically that I want to weld selected, I can come over here, click on my weld tool, and that will eliminate those overlaps. So that line of text is done. So welding is quite handy. We've got one more set of text down here. And there's different types of welding tools that you're going to be able to use, but what we're using is the simple weld selected vector tool here. So we're going to grab this, and I'm actually not going to use the weld tool for this one. I'm going to use the interactive trim, the scissors tool, so that way you can kind of get a feel for that as well. So we'll go ahead and convert that to a curve. We'll turn on our interactive trim tool. We're going to click this outside line and that first. There you go. There. There. That. And one last one to achieve the same results. Okay? So there are a few tools that are available to us that have the basic, they get us to the same end game, the same endpoint. All right, with that, we can go ahead and look through, make sure there's nothing else that needs to be cleaned up. And we are good. All right. So remember that, just depending, it all depends on the font that you're working with. It depends on the text you're working with, and it also depends on the object, because this doesn't just apply to text. If we have multiple objects overlapping and we need to either trim those or weld them, let's zoom into there. We can use our weld tool to weld those together. So it's not just text or objects, it's really anything that we need to bring together. And in this case, we can also, again, use our interactive trim, our scissor tool. We can come in here and clean those areas up as well using those tools. All right, so let's go ahead and delete our item here that we don't need. Now we want to, now that we have our sign laid out, we have our text cleaned up, we want to go ahead and bring in our image, that ribbon. I've basically, under the File Operations menu over here at the top, we have two folders here. One, this will import vectors from a file, such as your DXFs, PDFs, DWGs. The file to the end on the file operations is import bitmap for tracing. And notice how it says for tracing. It tells you that once we import this, we need to trace it. We need to convert it from that bitmap image into a vector, because you cannot create a toolpath on a bitmap image, basically a pixeled image. We have to convert it into a vector. And for those of you that don't know, a vector is a scalable graphic. Okay, there's no pixelation. So let's go ahead and import bitmap for tracing. We're going to go to our, I think I have this under my downloads folder, so we're going to navigate to that folder. And we're going to go down to the ribbon. Actually, it's not under my downloads folder. I remember that I moved it. We're going to go over to Documents, Aspire Files, Jobs, and here's our ribbon right here. So now the ribbon, depending on the size of, and while I have it in here, I'm basically going to use my arrow keys on my keyboard and just kind of get it over to the general position where I want it. I'll scale it and everything after I trace it. You don't want to scale a bitmap image larger, because you could end up going past its scalable size and it could pixelate on you. So you want to, whatever size that it brings it into at, we want to do our tracing off that size. Now we can reduce the size and trace off that because we're not going beyond its scalable size limit. But I want to basically work with the image that at whatever size it comes in. So I'm just going to use the zoom selected so it zooms into that image. And this is a low resolution photo. Notice there's some pixelation already around the edge, but that's okay. We need to come over to our Create Vectors menu and to our Trace Bitmap. And notice how it says Fit Vectors to select the bitmap. It's going to basically trace and create vectors to the outline. So we're going to click on here. Now we have two choices to work with. We can use our black and white trace, or we can use our color trace. The difference is with the black and white trace on your image, it basically, and I'm going to turn the fading down so we can see it a little bit better, but we have a slide bar here. And when we click on that slide bar, we can come in and we can trace the image by moving the slide bar back and forth until we get the kind of line cleanliness that we want. But sometimes, in my opinion, it can be kind of hit and miss, and I like using the color trace even for a black and white photo, because what it does is it lays out all the colors that are in the photo in these color swatches. And for me, I have a black ribbon here, so I have a black box. I can simply check that. My fill image or trace image is red, so it's going to fill that area in with my trace color. And now from here I can choose my corner fit. What the corner fit is when it creates the vector lines, your inside and outside corners, it wants to know, do you want it to be a loose fit or a tight fit? And in many cases you're going to use the default corner fit, which is about 82%. It gives you a nice contoured line. But you can absolutely adjust the fit of your lines using the slider bars here. But I'm going to use the default corner fit, which is 82%. The default noise, if you're working with a low resolution image or something in a lot of pixelation, you can tell it basically anything 10 pixels or less, you can filter out and tell it to ignore. I like using the default noise, which is 2 pixels. The default fading, all it does is it fades your bitmap in and out. Okay, so with our trace color selected, you know, the area that we want to trace, with our default corner fit selected, we're basically going to hit preview, and it has created our lines, and we can look and see if we're happy with that. If we are, we're going to go ahead and apply that by clicking apply, and then we can go ahead and close out of that tool because we're done. Now I've got my trace lines, but I've also got my image still in here. So I'm going to come up to my bitmap layer, and when I brought that image in, when I imported it in, it created that bitmap layer. We can go ahead and now turn that off to hide that image. The little light bulb right next to the layers turns those layers on and off. So we can go ahead and turn that off. And now we have our ribbon. Now I'm going to V-carve this, but first there's a couple of things I want to do. First thing I want to do is I want to resize this, and I can come into my Transform Objects menu over here, select the object size, and I can set the size that I want. A little bit too big, so let's try 5.5. And bring it down just a hair. There we go. And I can absolutely, you know, use the scale function here by double clicking on the object as well to get that move, scale, rotate box up around it. And in this case, I've got the size that I want. So I want to go ahead and select it. While it's selected, I'm just going to use my arrow keys to kind of get it into the position that I want. If I need to rotate it or anything, I could, but in this case, it's kind of rotated to the angle that I want. Now, if I were to V-carve this, V-carve, remember, carves the area between two lines to a depth that those two lines will meet at a V. And so if I were to V-carve this, this would go through my material. And to give you, to show you what I'm referring to is, if I select this and I jump over to my V-carve toolpath, and I don't set a flat depth, I'm using a 60-degree V-bit. If I calculate this, it's going to tell me, hey, my material is 3/4 of an inch thick. It's going to take 1.24 inches of material to cut this out. Make sure that I use a waste border. I'm going to cut through. Well, I don't want to cut through, so I don't want to do that. What I want to do is, because I know that a V-carve carves between the two lines, I can either use a quick engrave, which follows the line, or I can create an offset of my lines. And in this case, I want to create an offset. And I'm going to do that by coming over to our drawing tab, our offset and layout menu, and our offset selected vectors. And in this case, I'm going to go inward, and I'm going to offset inward about 1/4 of an inch, and we'll see what that does. I want to keep sharp corners. I want my offset to have sharp corners because the ribbon has some sharp corners on it. And select new. I've got selected, so it selects the new vectors. And 1/4 inch is way too big, so we're going to Control Z, and I'm going to bring that down to 1/8 of an inch. Okay. So now I have, with this offset, now I have a set of double lines that I can work with when I'm V-carving. Alright, so now that I have I can close out of the offset tool, I'm done with it. So now that I have my sign pretty much laid out, I don't need my sample image anymore. I can go ahead and just kind of either turn that off or delete it, but I'll turn it off since I have it on its own layer. I'm going to zoom to fit under my 2D view control to bring my design into view here. And now I'm ready to go ahead and create the V-carve toolpath. I've got my text cleaned up, everything is welded together, it's blended nicely. I've got my image in here, and I created the offset so I can just V-carve the outline. And I'm ready to go. So I want to basically, first of all, on my drawing tab over here under the 2D view control, the last icon, we can switch to the toolpath tab using this last icon here, and that will open up my toolpath tab. And I can either draw a box around the entire object to select everything, because I'm going to V-carve these, so everything's going to get V-carved. I can use a shortcut code, which is Control A, which is the shortcut key for select all, or I can right click and select all vectors and see how it shows you the shortcut code right there. So either way, I can get everything selected by one of those three tools. Now that I have this selected, we can go ahead and open up our toolpath. We have different toolpaths that we can work with, and in this case we're going to work with our V-carve toolpath. For the V-carve toolpath, I'm going to use a start depth of 0. Now your start depth, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be at 0. But where it would vary is, there's a couple of reasons why it would vary, but one of the reasons is if you need a little bit deeper cut to get a little bit more detail on your letters and everything, you can absolutely start with a little bit deeper start depth. And you want to use small increments because those small steps, in this case I'm using 20 thousandths to 40 thousandths, those make a big difference, especially when you're using V-bits and everything. So for me, my start depth is going to be 0. I won't need a flat depth. A flat depth is if I want to carve this to a certain depth and I want basically to create a flat bottom, what it does is it takes the V and it truncates it. If you see the little icon over here on the right, it basically kind of cuts the V off and carves it to that depth that you set over here for the flat depth. With that, you now have an option of using a flat area clearance tool or letting the V-bit kind of flatten those areas out. Well, in this case, I don't need a flat depth. I'm going to basically, my start depth is 0. Oops. And Now my bit, my tool, I'm going to be using a 60-degree V-bit, but if I wanted to change, I could simply click select, come into my tool database, choose the bit that I want to work with, and then click OK. Alright, so once I have my start depth set, I have my tool set, I can simply come down and click calculate. Now if I want to, I can give this a name, this particular toolpath a name. We can go ahead and click calculate. It will calculate and it will bring us into our preview toolpath window. Now in our preview toolpath window, we can basically, before we even go carve a piece of wood on the table, we can preview it in this window by one of these options. Preview selected toolpath, if I have it selected down here. We can preview visible toolpaths, meaning that it's visible on the screen. Or if we have multiple toolpaths that we're running, which I don't want to run all toolpaths, we could preview all of them. But I don't want to because I have another toolpath in here that was created earlier. So once I have this selected, I can basically click on Preview Selected Toolpath to carve it out. Alright, now if I wanted to say basically kind of get a visual of what this would look like if I painted the sign, I have right now set up for using a piece of cherry wood, and that has nothing to do with the wood that you're carving on the table. All that is for the preview image. So I've got a piece of cherry selected. It'll give me a nice preview here. I'm using the material color as the machined area color, but I could absolutely use a global fill color to see what my sign would look like painted, with different colors. Or if I have multiple toolpaths, I could absolutely assign a toolpath color. I could come down here, select the toolpath that I want, and I could give that toolpath a color and assign it to it. So that's three ways that I can kind of view this. Now if I'm happy with the cut, everything looks good, looks real clean, we can now go ahead and close out of the preview toolpath, and we can open up our save toolpath option, which is this icon here. It looks like a little red, white, and blue floppy disk. If you guys remember those 3x5 floppy disks, we can go ahead and click on that, and we can select our toolpath by clicking on the text. See how it highlights it in blue, or when it's selected it's kind of a bold black. We want to click on that and it will show us up here the toolpath to be saved is our final sign toolpath, which we have selected below. The post processor we use on the digital wood carver is the G-code inch.tap, but if you're watching this video and you have a different machine or whatever, you can absolutely find the post processor that's fit for your machine. Make sure that you do that, you would, once we have everything selected, we could go ahead and click Save Toolpath. We can give it a name, and what I like to do, and what I always tell my customers, is when we're naming a toolpath, because over the months, over the years, over the weeks, we're going to have multiple toolpaths in our system. We want to keep our jobs organized, no matter how small it is. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder. And this job folder, I'm going to call it, basically, I'm going to give it Kevin's Sign, because this is for a friend of mine. And in that job folder, now I can come in and save my toolpath. Now, in some cases, like in our case here, we have one toolpath. But if we had multiple toolpaths, we want to basically save our toolpaths in the order that we're going to carve them. So what I like to do is number the toolpath. So 01 would be the order that it gets carved, underscore, and then my size of my material. And I'm just going to call this Kevin's Sign. Excuse me. And then underscore. Then I'm going to type in the bit that I used. Now, just from this toolpath, if I'm ever out in my shop, I don't need to come back into my Vectric if I couldn't remember, what size material this sign was for, what bit that I used, what order it got run in. Just from the toolpath name, I know that this is the first toolpath to run in the job. I need a 13 by 16 piece of material, and I'm using a 60-degree V-bit to cut it. So that's how I name my toolpaths, but again, you can name whatever simplify system that you would like to come up with. So I'm going to click Save. Now I have my toolpath saved, but I need to save my design. Saving your toolpath does not save all your artwork and your design. We need to come over here to File, Save As, and I'm going to jump back into that same job folder, and I'm going to give this a file name, whatever I wanted to name it, and click Save. This is going to save the V-Carve Pro CRV file, or the whatever the Aspire is. Oh my goodness gracious, how did I forget? Let's see what we got here. CRV and CR3D, if I'm not mistaken, for Aspire. I do it enough and I can't remember what the extension is. But once we have this design saved now, I can also absolutely, while I'm in preview mode here, I can save this proof image. I can basically lay it out and get a good layout of it. Something like that. I can save the preview image, and I can save it as a bitmap, JPEG, PNG, or GIF. And in this case, I'll do a JPEG. It's a small file. And I'm going to call this Kevin Sign _ proof. This is a proof image. Alright. So now if I go into my file folders here, and let's basically go back here. It's under Kevin's jobs. All of his jobs are under his jobs. So if I go into my File Explorer here and go to my Documents, Aspire Files, Kevin's Jobs, I can look here, and in this job folder I've got my CRV file, I've got my proof image, and I've got my toolpath, and everything that has to do with this file this job is in this folder. Now there's one other thing that needs to be moved into the folder, and that is going to be the ribbon, because this ribbon image was part of that job. So I'm just going to drop it into that folder there. So now everything that is involved with this job is in this folder, and it'll help me find it later on. I don't have to search all over the place. Alright, so now that we have our sign completed, I hope this helps with you getting started with your V-Carve desktop, your V-Carve Pro, or your Aspire software with working with text, how to use the weld tool for welding, creating simple toolpaths, and then of course importing images and tracing those images. Your welding tool is quite handy, especially if you're doing something a little bit more complex like text on text, and we can talk about that at another time. But with that, I hope that kind of give you something to work with, and you can pull some little bit of information from this small tutorial to help you kind of navigate with laying out and working with your signs. And until next time, I'll see you soon.